Perfect. Okay, so this is the CBT model. As I mentioned, thoughts, behaviors, and feelings are all related to one another. And so as you look at this model, you can see that thoughts can impact feelings, but the feelings can also impact thoughts. That's why you have these bidirectional models and bidirectional arrows. But inside all of that, if you think of thoughts, behaviors, and feelings as things that people more so perceive on the surface, the core belief is underneath all that. It's deeper embedded, almost in some ways like part of your personality structure. And core beliefs consist of these fixed ideas about yourself, about other people and how they might perceive you, and about your own future and whether or not you feel hopeful about your future. And so those are the three basic kinds of core beliefs. And the way that core beliefs operate is that they tend to permeate all areas of life. So your core beliefs will come into play whether you're dating or experiencing a romantic relationship, or whether you're at work, or how you deal with friends, how you achieve goals, how you cultivate habits. Basically, in any area of your life, core beliefs can definitely come into play in terms of what you believe about yourself, what you're able to achieve, and how other people might treat you.
I'm so fascinated with this because I have seen the CBT model before, but never with the core beliefs as the center foundation. And I think that's a missing element when people start learning about CBT, is they focus on that tip of the iceberg stuff because that's the stuff we're seeing. But in actuality, all of that's coming from that deeper place.
Exactly. And so I think we can also think about a different way if we want to take this analogy a bit further in terms of how the CBT model operates. And so even though in this model, I'm starting with core beliefs written at the top, you can see that each one feeds into the next level. So core beliefs, as we've talked about, is these fundamental ideas you have about yourself, other people and how they treat you, the world around you, and your future. That leads to certain assumptions. So assumptions are also what we call conditional rules that you create based on the core belief. So let me give you an example. Let's say a core belief that you have is that I am unworthy. You basically just feel like you're unworthy of good things happening, unworthy of positive attention, unworthy of reaching your goals, whatever it may be. And so if you feel that way deep down, what are some of the conditional rules that you would use to operate in life? Well, if I was somebody who felt like I was unworthy of things, then maybe what I would do, for example, is overcompensate. So maybe one of my assumptions is if I try my best to be of service to people, then they won't discover that I'm unworthy, or they'll think I'm worthy, right? So that would be like one possible rule or assumption based on that core belief. Let's say you have another core belief. Let's use a different one. Sometimes people have a core belief that they're incapable, that, really they're not that effective at life, whether it's career or anything else, or they just don't feel like they can take care of themselves. So then maybe a conditional rule or an assumption for that would be, try your best to act as independently as possible so that nobody realizes you're actually incapable. Like, don't ever tell anybody when you've made a mistake. Just always try to operate as if you don't need anyone else, right? And so these are just examples, but as you can see, if we follow that idea, if you have a certain assumption, it's going to lead to certain coping strategies or compensatory mechanisms. So for example, if you have that core belief that you're incapable, and let's say you get some constructive criticism about a project you did. They didn't insult you, they just said, hey, there's this area you need to improve on. The compensatory coping strategy might be to really get in their face and say, no, I did everything right. Like, this is not me, that's somebody else's fault, right? Almost like not taking responsibility, right? And so you can see that the core beliefs can affect the rules that you make in life and then how you respond to situations. And then we're starting to move into the more surface area of things that happen to us every day. So when a situation occurs, that leads to certain automatic thoughts, which can also come in the form of images, because they're very shorthand and fast. And then they lead to reactions on the feelings and behavioral front. So let's go ahead and utilize that example of core belief again, that you are incapable, that you just feel ineffective at life.
Okay.
We talked about the possible assumptions, and you never want anybody to find that out. And so maybe when bad things happen, when a mistake is being pointed out, you almost like, either you don't want to talk about it or you deflect and you say that it might be somebody else's fault, but it's certainly not your fault. So let's say the situation is that then you get laid off from work. If that happens to somebody with this type of core belief, their first automatic thought might be, oh my gosh, I can't do anything right. Like, even though being laid off is not their fault, the company might just be downsizing, but the first thought they have is, I just can't do anything right no matter how hard I
can I ask a clarifying question? For the situation, is that a consequence of the maladaptive coping strategies, or is the situation just any situation and this is how your core belief is going to affect situations?
It's a very good question. So yeah, not always does a situation happen because of your coping strategies.
Okay.
Sometimes that arrow is non-existent and the situation just happens to you, right?
Yep.
But other times it can be related. So if we took that example of what I talked about, let's say you talk back to your boss and you say, I don't agree. I didn't make this mistake. And your boss says, okay, I guess you're not ready for a promotion. That could be the situation that is caused by that compensatory strategy. But that's a clarifying question. So then if you're at the level of the automatic thought of, I just can't do anything right, imagine how you might feel and behave if that's how you truly thought. So if you think I can't do anything right, what are some possible feelings? You might feel dejected, hopeless, angry, sad. And some behaviors might be, you try to hide the fact that you were laid off from your family for a few days. You're like, I don't even want to tell them because then I'm going to have to confront my core belief that I am incapable. I don't want to have to explain myself. So when you hide that from them, maybe you kind of go more inward and become more isolative because you don't want to call your friends and family. They're going to ask you, hey, what's new? And you're going to have to say, I just got laid off today. And so actually you might actually become more isolated as a result. And you can see how everything then impacts one another, right? Because the more isolated you become, the less able you are going to be able to get opportunities to basically refute your core belief, right? Because if you told your family would say, well, don't worry about it. That's obviously not your fault. You'll find another job. Everything's going to be fine. But if you're not getting that positive support, then you're just left with your own thoughts about how incapable you truly are, therefore strengthening the core belief. Mm-hmm. And so you can see how core beliefs, again, can permeate all the different levels of your actions, your feelings, and your thoughts.
This is wonderful. I want to get some feedback from our live audience. And if you're watching this on replay, please leave comments below as well. If this is the first time you've heard of CBT, what is your initial reaction to seeing the relationship between core beliefs and how it permeates throughout different scenarios in our life? And if you are if you're familiar with CBT, like I thought I was familiar with CBT, I have never heard this though. This is brand new to me. This is like the layer behind CBT. So I'm just so happy that you're doing this, Dr. Judy. Thank you.
Of course. So I think, if we're ready to proceed, we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify your core beliefs, because Kyle, we all have them. No matter how developed we think we are, we all have core beliefs. And a common question I get from people is, are all core beliefs negative? And of course they're not. Sometimes we do have positive core beliefs as well. The reason why we're focusing on the ones that are more negative is because the positive ones are not the ones that cause us to be in distress, Those are not the ones that we need to solve problems for. Those are our strengths, right? And so for CBT, we're trying to identify what the problem is and we're going to solve it. And so we're talking more about the negative core beliefs. So the idea of the laddering technique, and perhaps Kyle, you and I can go through an example of this and we can do a role play, is that you start with an automatic thought, which is the stuff that's more conscious, right? The stuff that you kind of do know that you're having these thoughts and thought processes throughout the day. It's that tip of the iceberg that everybody can see above the water. You start with an automatic thought that you had in response to a stressful situation. And then we're going to pretty much proceed with each thought. So like, what does this thought mean if it was true? And then you'll have a new thought. And then we ask the same question of that new thought. What if this thought is true? What will it mean? And in this way, we actually get to the bottom of the belief system. And at that point, you will arrive at the core belief. And when we do the demonstration, this will make a lot more sense. But basically, the overview of the laddering technique is to identify a conscious, automatic thought that you had to a stressful situation. And after each thought, you ask yourself, so what if this thought is true? What will it mean? Then you take that second thought and you ask the same questions. I've also provided here some alternate questions that you can ask yourself if that first one doesn't jog enough for you. You can ask questions like, what does this thought tell me or say about how I view the world, friends and family? What is the worst thing that this thought may say? Why is this so bad? And what thoughts do I have about myself that would make this thought so terrible if it was true? So any constellation of these questions should get you to get to another thought. And then eventually, after maybe 5 to 6 iterations of it, you'll get to a core belief that feels more fundamental and basic and permeates all of your life. So Kyle, if you are up for it, do you want to do a role play where maybe you can role play a patient who is coming in with a stressful situation they're dealing with?
Absolutely. I will volley it back to you, though, to ask what would be a common core belief that we should work on, or should I not have that going into it?
Have to have that in mind at all. We can just start with any stressful situation that we can use as a role play, whether it has to be relationships or health or career. And then from there, we're going to just work our way down. And then at the end of it, we can talk about some common core beliefs that people have.
Cool. So I think the biggest feedback I get from members is it's relationships. And they feel that they are doomed to have an unhappy relationship, whether it's with this person or somebody else. They just can't find a relationship that works for them.
Okay, that's great. So let's go ahead and start with that. So let's key in on a specific situation. So Kyle, if you were playing the role of this patient, tell me a relationship problem that maybe you're dealing with.
My relationship problem is that I don't think my partner truly loves me, and I don't think we'll ever be happy. Yet we're married and we're in this agreement, and I feel stuck and I don't see a way out.
Got it. Okay, so the situation is I don't think my partner truly loves me. They are never going to be happy, and we're married and I feel stuck and I can't see a way out. And so I think, this is a good situation. This is very timely because I feel like a lot of people are saying that they're having relationship issues right now, even, as the pandemic wears on, because it's causing them to basically look at their relationship under a microscope, and people are thinking a lot more about these types of issues. So if that's the situation, and maybe there's certain things that, for example, happened that led you to have, this particular thing at the top of your mind as you're role playing this patient, it could be that, for example, you checked in with your partner this morning and they just seem dismissive of you. It's like they're not really paying attention to you, and you're like, do you even care about me? Do you even love me? So what would be a conscious thought you might have to that response? So again, imagine that the problem here was that your partner dismissed you. Like you were trying to have some quality time with them and they're like, I'm too busy, I don't have time. And they just acted like they weren't listening, like you didn't matter. Right. So what an automatic thought that you could have had in response to that?
The two that come to mind are this person's mad at me, or I am not worthy of that person.
Got it. Okay. So let's start with this person is mad at me, because that's a very quick and primal thought. And I'm going to ask you that question, as we talked about, go back one slide, after each automatic thought, ask one of these questions. So what if this thought was true? What would that mean if your partner was mad at you? What would that signify for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, it would signify that I had unknowingly done something to upset him.
Got it. Okay, so then that's the second automatic thought. Again, we're kind of going through the laddering thing to produce thoughts based on these questions that we're asking. So what would be so bad if you did something to upset him? What thought do you have about yourself that would make this particular idea so terrible?
That I am not aware of my actions. I'm not self-aware.
Got it. And what would that mean about you if you weren't self-aware? What would be so bad about that if you weren't self-aware?
That I'm floating through life. I'm not mindful.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And what would this mean about you if you were just kind of floating through life, like really, like not really even sure what is happening when? Like, what would that mean about your life and how you feel about yourself and your ability to enact positive outcomes?
I'm a failure. I am failing, and failures fail, so I'm a failure.
Got it. All right, so we have actually arrived at a very common core belief, which is I am a failure. And the way that we can check if something is indeed a core belief is we can ask ourselves that question again, so again, going back to one of these questions. What if this thought is true? What will it mean? What does this thought tell me about me? And realize that basically there's nothing beneath that maybe you're going to be saying different permutations of the same thing. Mm-hmm. That would mean that you arrived at a core belief. Another way that you can assess whether or not it's a core belief is core beliefs are very shorthand and very universal, meaning it's just kind of like a very flippant, short statement that isn't situational. So if you look up at these thoughts here, automatic thought 1, the partner is mad at me. Well, if a partner is mad at you, that's situational to your partner, right? I must have done something to upset him. That's still also pretty situational. I'm not aware of my actions. Well, that feels more general, but it isn't a core belief because what's the consequence of that? We haven't gotten to the consequence, right? So once we get to automatic thought 5, and you're saying, I'm a failure, it feels like this is a statement that could apply to you across situations. Like you make a mistake at work, I'm a failure. You get into a fight with your partner. I can't even succeed at my relationship. Your kid gets mad at you. I'm a terrible parent. I'm a failure. You can see how something like this can apply throughout and it's not situational. Plus, it's written in such a way that it's like 3 to 4 words. Pretty much all core beliefs are like this. It's like, it's not long form. It's like, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy. And you can see how all of those things can actually play a role. One other core belief that I was entertaining as you were going through these automatic thoughts, Kyle, in this role play, is that another possible core belief is that I'm not in control. This idea of not being in control, only because as you were talking about automatic 3 and 4, you're talking about how you're kind of floating through life. Maybe you just don't know, whether or not you can actually enact positive outcomes, for example. And I was thinking about the situation that you're married, but you feel stuffy, you can't see a way out. That also elicits feelings of not being in control. And so people obviously have more than one core belief sometimes, so it could be possible that you, as you're role playing this patient, I'm a failure is one core belief, and I feel out of control is a second one. That could be possible. But the way that we would test the core belief is, as I mentioned, really checking to see if there's anything underneath that would be conjured up if you ask those lists of questions that we've been looking at. And also asking yourself, could this idea permeate multiple areas of my life, whether I'm talking about friendships or family or romantic relationships or career, or even starting a healthy habit? I mean, imagine if this person, this patient that you're playing right now, Kyle, starts a new healthy regimen, and then in a week they mess up and they whatever, skipped a workout, which by the way, everyone does no matter how successful you are. And this is the kind of person though that would go immediately to I'm a failure and maybe give up and not even try it for a very long time, right? So you can see how this is the kind of idea that somebody could have if they're not able to believe in themselves and truly believe that they're a failure. Here's just another example of laddering, just so that you guys can see a slightly different example.
And by the way, I did not see these slides before today, so that was a coincidence.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, this is actually really good. I had no idea that like you would also come up with this one. I literally, and I know that Kyle didn't see these slides, I literally wrote them like 2 hours ago. So this is another example of laddering. Okay, imagine you know, you're cooking and it's like a terrible soup. It's not, it doesn't taste good, whatever, happens to all of us. I love cooking, and there are still times where I'm like, wow, this is a real lemon. Like, this is not a good dish. But the person says, oh, the soup is awful. And then they ask themselves the question, if that were true, what would that mean? Well, I'm a terrible cook, okay? And if that were the case, what would that mean? Oh my gosh, I guess I'm a bad mother or wife, fill in the blank, okay? And if that was so, what would that mean? Well, I just fail at everything. And again, that's the poor belief. And so just another example at how we can distinguish between something that is more situational, right? The automatic thought, the soup is awful. It's just about the soup. But look, if you ask this question and go down this laddering technique, how quickly you discover that there is something that's more pervasive underneath operating, basically to produce this thought that comes up at the top of the water on the surface.
And I want to go back to the example of me as in a marriage that I'm unhappy in. Because when you said something else that kind of, you kind of got a wind of as a core belief is I'm not in control. And although this was this is not a therapy session and I'm not married or anything, I'm still answering as me in this scenario. And it's interesting you brought up control, because control is something that has been brought up to me before in relationships, even by coworkers, my need to feel like I have control of the scenario. And the reason I bring this up for our audience is because I've been in a lot of therapy, okay? I started when I was 9 years old. And when I'm working with a new therapist or a new psychologist, or even my psychiatrist who also does therapy, and they kind of tune into me the way Dr. Jody did just then, it makes me go, okay, they're really seeing it. They're really, this is somebody who knows what they're doing. They're really good. And I think sometimes people in therapy experience that and then run away from it because they go, they found me out. How did she know that I have control problems? But that's what we're there for. It's like pretend we're a car and they're a mechanic. Their job is to help us figure out the truth. And they can only work based on the information we give them. So if you're new to therapy or you're just starting with a therapist and you run into that where they go, now, has anyone ever told you this or blah, 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 and it's true, that's a good sign, I think. Take a deep breath, lean into that, because you're about to discover gold. And so the fact that Dr. Jody said that, I'm going to go back and watch my reaction, because I was like, you're onto something, because that's a conversation I've had before, even in this hypothetical mock scenario.
I love that you're talking about this, because it's so funny, even when we like role play patients, we obviously are drawing somewhat from our own experiences still, you know?
Exactly.
And I'm glad that you said that, because, you know, I lovingly call people in my life type A individuals, because I believe I'm a type A individual, right? Like some of the people I love the most are the type A. I don't think that that's necessarily a negative thing. There's a lot of positive traits associated with type A's too, but what is one of the problems of a type A type of individual who's extra motivated, you know, they are go-getters, like control. And when they feel like they don't have control, they do not like that. Like, it is a tough thing for them. But you and I have talked about this a lot, and you know, self-development, if you're doing it well, is not supposed to be a picnic. Like, you're gonna feel some things, you know? Like that's why it's so funny when sometimes I look at self-development and stuff, or I look at my self-help books, and people are just like, I feel fabulous. It's like, you might feel fabulous a little later, but like, there are certain points of that you can't be feeling fabulous all the time. Like, and if you do, then you're not doing the work. And it's not meant to criticize anybody who maybe like has done that type of work and is like, every day I read this book and it's making me feel so happy about myself. That's still a form of self-development, but that's much more like mantras, or like, positive thinking versus like actually digging in to find out the root of some of your problems.
Yeah, I tell people that there is a difference between motivation and self-improvement, and they both have a place. And maybe the day before a big presentation, you just need the motivation. But the week prior to the motivation or your presentation, maybe that's when you need the self-improvement or self-development. So making sure you know what you're doing is really critical. But
half of our hour here, and tomorrow we're going to have even more time to actually really dig in for some of these tools and tips and also your questions. I do want to leave you with a couple of ideas on how to challenge core beliefs. And the way that we challenge core beliefs, my favorite way, is to enact a behavioral experiment. So the problem with core beliefs, as we've been covering, is that it's something that feels like it permeates a lot of your life, particularly when you're stressed and encountering stressful situations, because that's when your beliefs are tried. If everything's going well, these negative core beliefs don't even come up. Like, think about if you had a core belief that you're a failure. Well, if you're just killing it at work and your relationship's going perfectly, that's not going to surface at all. Like, it's just going to sit dormant and do nothing. But it's the minute that you have that fight with your partner, or the minute that you get passed up for a promotion, like that's when these negative core beliefs come up. And so the behavioral experiment is very important because what we're trying to do is basically shake that foundation loose. So if you think about this iceberg analogy we've been utilizing this entire time, when you buy into a core belief, it's really strong. The foundation is super solid, and as human beings, this is the thing with our brains, we're looking for confirmatory evidence unless we try to do the contrary. Our brains are cognitive misers. They're kind of lazy by default, and they're going to just look for things in the environment and explain it in accordance with your existing schema. So it's not going to take new information. For example, let's say somebody tells you, I love you no matter what, even if you make mistakes. You're going to take that if you have a core belief of I'm a failure, and instead of just like taking and saying, wow, that's new information, like, can I really be loved even when I go and make mistakes? Maybe I'm not a failure after all. Instead, if you have that very firm core belief of I'm a failure, you're going to take that thought that somebody says to you and you're going to say, yeah, but you haven't really seen how many mistakes I can really make. Like, you'll argue against it in a way that actually confirms your core belief. Like, you're only saying that because you haven't really seen me at my worst, blah, blah, blah. And so the whole idea about behavioral experiments is basically chipping away at that foundation, starting to really consciously look for concrete evidence in your environment and in all of your interactions that would dispel the core belief, and then just allowing yourself to say, okay, there's at least a few situations in which my core belief does not apply. So that your core belief, instead of being pervasive, becomes more conditional. Like, okay, that's the first step. Like, okay, well, my core belief doesn't apply to my husband. My core belief doesn't apply to my mom. My core belief doesn't really apply to my work. Being able to start chipping away at it so that you can start to see it more conditional as opposed to absolute is really the first step. So the behavioral experiments are kind of fun. I think that they're fun because I'm a researcher, I like getting data, and when all else fails, data is what's going to help me to understand a situation a bit better. And so the idea is to think about a situation where it could provoke your core belief. And then as you consider that situation, think about a way that you can behave or act that would get you some data that would give you some indication of whether or not this core belief is true one way or another, at least with that person or that situation.
Yes.
I'll give you an example, and then Kyle, I would love for you to come up with one as the patient in this instance. One example, if somebody has a I'm a failure type of core belief, is to make a mistake on purpose with somebody, right? And you start with something that's relatively low stakes. So maybe you make a mistake that doesn't have a lot of bearing on an outcome, And it's just with like a distant friend. It's not with somebody who like you care that much about, but you care a little bit, right? So basically, come up with this experiment like, okay, I'm gonna make a phone date with one of my friends. I'm not that close to her. And then I'm gonna like on purpose, like call her 25 minutes late. And so then you do it, you like commit to it, but you also have to predict what's going to happen before you do it. So you predict like how you might feel or how you might think or how you might behave. So you're like, okay, probably if I was to actually do this, I would apologize up and down, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like over apologize, try to overcompensate, be like extra nice to her, like, basically fall over yourself and ingratiate yourself because obviously you're thinking, I don't want her to think that I'm just a complete F-up,
Right.
But you go into the situation, you make this blunder on purpose, and then you basically see what happens. So you call your friend, and after you make this prediction of how you might think or feel, you call them and you say, I'm so sorry that I was 25 minutes late. And you make a pact with yourself to not over-explain, but obviously you apologize and be gracious about it. And then you observe their reaction to you. And very likely, if they were actually a friend of yours, they're not going to blow up at you and tell you that you're a horrible human being. They'll be like, sorry, it happens. Like, we have like a few minutes left. You want to just chat now or you want to reschedule, right? I mean, that's the most common thing that most anybody would say. And then after that, you basically go back and you think about, well, this is what I thought was going to happen, and this is what actually happened. So now, what does that mean about me now that I see how this actually operates in the real world? So it's almost like going back to these questions once the situation has occurred, and basically asking yourself, now that I've actually gotten the concrete evidence, like, what does this really mean about this core belief, right? And at the very least, I think one possible idea you might come to is, well, certainly this person doesn't seem to think I'm a failure. Like, even if it's conditional, like, okay, I have proof on one person. One person doesn't believe that I'm a total failure and forgives me easily and it's fine. Like, that's how we start to shape the foundation. So then you like maybe do another experiment that might have to do with work, or another experiment that eventually has to do with people who are closer to you and meaning more to you. But it's really about building these layers, and the most important things is that you predict what you think will happen beforehand, because that's going to get at your core beliefs and what those conditional rules are. And then you observe what actually happens and then try to make sense of it.
I understand that. How do these core beliefs, though, tie into cognitive distortions? Because when you were mentioning, oh my gosh, if I was 25 minutes late for a call, I would be apologizing, and you would be, I'm assuming, catastrophizing the situation before it even happens. So I guess now I'm saying this out loud, can these cognitive distortions be our core beliefs?
So cognitive distortions are generally relating to the automatic thoughts level of the CBT model. So this is the part that is visible above the water, but we don't know them as cognitive distortions until we actually really think about it.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, but mostly we have patterns, right, to our thinking. Like whether you're catastrophizing, like you said, like, oh my God, this person's gonna never forgive me and not be friends with me anymore or whatever, or very black and white thinking. Automatic thoughts is how we usually talk about the cognitive distortions, in that your automatic thoughts will kind of fall under these themes. And some common cognitive distortions are things like catastrophizing, ignoring or discounting the positive, shoulds, which is a lot of rules, like I should have done more yesterday, I should have been nicer, I should have, right? There's also black and white thinking, which means that everything is all good or all bad. There's no in between. It's very hard to be kind of sitting with that gray. Another common cognitive distortion is mind reading, where you think that you know what other people think about you before you check it out.
I do that one.
That's a really common one. And then another type of cognitive distortion is personalization, where you compare yourself to everything and usually you come up short. And to your question, Kyle, core beliefs can also be cognitive distortions. I mean, most of them are, like, so even though we talk about cognitive distortions more at the automatic thought level, technically every single core belief is a cognitive distortion because it's very absolute, so it's very black and white. I mean, really, I think the most common type of cognitive distortion when we talk about core beliefs is that it's black and white thinking. It's like, I'm a failure, period. It's not like, I'm a failure at crocheting. I mean, like, that'd be fine. I don't think that's a core belief. Like, that's just real. Like, I don't know how to crochet, right? But if you say I'm a failure, period, it's a black and white type of thought pattern where it's like, there's no in between. You can't just like have failed today or like failed at this relationship, but you'll do better on the next one, And that I think is what we're trying to combat. And that's why the behavioral experiments are so important, because basically you're shaking loose this idea of something that is absolute, that is black and white. You're starting to create these conditional experiences where it's like, okay, I still pretty much think I'm a failure, but I have to say, after this experiment, I guess I'm not really a failure to this particular friend. You know what I mean? And the more you do these experiments, the more you get to loosen that type of thinking.
Yes. Tomorrow, this question, because it's a great one. AS asks, I'm 52. Is it really possible to retrain my thinking at this age? How long would you do this before you know if it's going to work?
You can absolutely retrain your thinking at any age, and I will say that I just recently worked with a patient who was 65 years old and has gone through extreme chronic trauma for at least 18 years of her life, and she was able to retrain her thinking. So please don't give up hope. It's always possible. The work is difficult at times because you have to encounter some difficult feelings and experiences and the beliefs about yourself. But the idea about CBT is that it's empowering. You feel like I can do something about this today. And even if you still continue to have those thoughts from time to time, the difference is once you've been exposed to CBT is that you have a plan. Okay, I have this thought again, but no big deal. I'll just apply these skills, right? That's what I really love about CBT because it is very active. And it makes you feel like, okay, even if thoughts come up, even if I get depressed again, I know what to do now. I have a plan. And that is what I want to say to AS and